And that's grace. But you're still saying, wait a minute. I don't like it. Two things I don't like about it. The thing, number one, I don't like about it at all is that God doesn't do it for everybody. And the other thing I don't like about it at all is that it seems to rest in God's eternal counsel, and it has nothing to do with my actions. What does the Bible say? I used to hate this doctrine, and I used to have a sign up in my study when I was a seminary student. I fought it kicking and screaming for 5 years. Had the sign up in my study. It said, you are not responsible to God. You are responsible to God to believe, to preach, and to teach what God says is the truth, not what you want the truth to be. And when I wrestled with this doctrine, I kept coming back to Romans 9 again and again and again. And it was Romans 9 I couldn't escape, where the Apostle Paul writes these words. It is not the children of the flesh who are children of God, but the children of the promise are regarded as descendants. For this is the word of promise, at this time I will come and Sarah shall have a son. And not only this, but there was Rebekah also, when she had conceived twins by one man, our father Isaac. For though the twins were not yet born and had not done anything good or bad, in order that God's purpose according to his choice might stand, not because of works, but because of him who calls, it was said to her, the older will serve the younger. And as it is written, Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated. What? What shall we say then? There's no injustice in God, is there? Isn't it strange that Paul anticipates that protest? I don't think Paul would ever, if Paul were semi-Pelagian, I think a statement like that, what is there injustice in God, would be a waste of apostolic breath. One of the things that comforts me that the Reformed doctrine of predestination is the biblical one is that the same reactions that the Apostle Paul got and there's the same reactions that Jesus got when he taught the doctrine are the reactions that we get all the time. Nobody gets mad at the Arminian doctrine of predestination. Nobody gets mad at the prescient view of predestination, and I'll tell you why. Because the foreknowledge prescient view of predestination is not an explanation of predestination, ladies and gentlemen. It is the denial of predestination. Pure and simple. Because in the final analysis, the decision rests with man. I don't know of any place in Christian doctrine where I'm convinced that humanism has made a deeper inroad than this. Because it will not take seriously the dimensions of the fall of man that have brought us to the place where we are morally and spiritually dead. And that only the electing grace of God can save us in our spiritual death. In order that God's purpose, according to his choice, not because of works, but because of him who called. Is there any injustice in God? May it never be. For he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. You see what happens if the whole world is judged guilty before God, if the whole world is spiritually bankrupt, if the whole world is in hostility towards God, spiritually dead. We have this American idea that if God reaches down and sovereignly, according to the good pleasure of his will, gives grace to some of these people and brings them to life and saves them from hell, that he's now therefore morally obligated to do the same thing for everyone else. And somehow if he doesn't, we will stand in protest and say, that's not fair. No, that's not equal. And what God is doing here is saying very clearly, don't you remember what I taught to you through the lips of Moses? I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy. I'm not obligated to be merciful to anybody. If mercy were an obligation, it wouldn't be mercy. It would be justice. And if I want to give my mercy to Jacob and not to Esau, what's unfair about it? What's unjust about it? Now, granted, if God punished Esau and Esau were an innocent man, then there would be injustice. But the biblical doctrine of election, get this point, teaches that some people receive grace, the rest receive justice. No one ever receives injustice from God. Do you understand that? And finally, he said, so then it does not depend on the man who wills or the man who runs, but on God who has mercy. Every discussion I've ever been in on the doctrine of election and of predestination has come down to this point, folks. On what does it depend in the final analysis? And my Arminian friends, I'm convinced in the final analysis, have to say, it depends on him who wills. Depends on your free will. Depends on your choice that God sees down the corridors of time. That's what it depends on. The decision is yours. How many times have you heard the evangelist say, there's an election going on here. God votes for you, Satan votes against you, and it's a tie, and you have to cast a deciding vote. If you have to cast a deciding vote, ladies and gentlemen, you are destined to hell with no hope. Because you, in your own strength, unregenerate, will never vote for God. Ever. But according to salvation, according to election, yes, there's an election. But only one person votes. The devil doesn't have a vote. There's only one vote that counts. And from the foundation of the world, God cast his ballot with your name on it, if it so be that you are in Christ. So that it depends not on him who runs, not on him who chooses, not on him who wills, but on the sovereign grace of God. I have to be candid. If the Apostle Paul came in this room right now and heard a bunch of theologians arguing about election and salvation, and they were saying, they couldn't get past the final point, and they said, look, we're arguing, Apostle, on the final analysis, what does my salvation depend on my will or on God's will? Which is it, Paul? Please tell us. Can you think of any way that the Apostle Paul could answer that question more clearly than he just did in that statement? I urge you, my beloved brothers and sisters, that if you find this doctrine distasteful, look at it again.